Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News Preview Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Adam White and Samuel Rooke. Before we dive into the games behind and ahead of us, let's start by quickly running through the news of the week. France officially qualified for the 2018 World Cup in Russia on Tuesday, seeing off Belarus at home 2-1 to clinch top spot in Group A. The result didn't matter in the end as Sweden lost 2-0 to the Netherlands, guaranteeing Les Bleus top spot. Manager Didier Deschamps will also reportedly be rewarded for that success with a new deal. RMC are reporting that the Les Bleus coach should sign a deal before the end of the year that will run until 2020. However, there will also supposedly be a clause inserted to amicably split should the French side struggle next summer. That's all for now, but to keep up to date with everything French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. Let's dive into this week's action, at least in the midweek at the Stade de France, where Les Bleus sealed qualification to the World Cup in somewhat uninspiring fashion. Adam, does this performance against the Belarusians prove that Deschamps still has a lot of work to do from now until June?
Yeah, I think it does. When you look at France's squad, it's unbelievable the talent they've got. I think the squad that doesn't make the squad is probably better than England's squad, which is ridiculous. But he still needs to kind of sort of distill the best team, and I think he had an idea of his best team after the Euros and perhaps in the first part of qualifying. But the emergence of players like Kylian Mbappe and Thomas Lemar and then Ousmane Dembélé as well to some extent has kind of upset the balance, which is a good thing to happen because they're such good players. But I don't know if Deschamps knows what his best team is. In fact, I'm pretty sure he doesn't. And how he goes about getting the best out of those players and the players he had already in situ. So it shows that there's quite a sort of a long road for Deschamps in terms of settling on that first choice 11 and making sure that he does get the best out of those sort of players. It might mean sort of in those friendlies experimenting, which is a little bit dangerous given it's so close to the tournament. Or he might sort of have a team mind and he might look to make that team gel and perhaps play that team consistently over the friendlies and the warm-up games, and hoping that it's the right 11 and he sort of just needs to get a bit more cohesion. Either way, I think this performance against Belarus isn't necessarily uncommon. Although they won the game, they're very drab, and that's kind of been the same for the rest of the qualifying campaign, apart from perhaps the 4-0 win over Holland at the Stade de France. So, yeah, I think there's a long way to go, and I still think he needs to work out how he gets the best out of the combination of players, especially Mbappe, Griezmann, and if he goes with Giroud, then Dembélé and Pogba together. It'll be interesting to see what he does, but some decisions to be made, I think.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting, especially after that really drab game, really. It didn't matter in the end, in all honesty, Sam, but who played well in those two games, really? Because both of them, although they're wins, although they were needed, there wasn't really much to shout about, was there?
It wasn't really. The Belarus game was perhaps an improvement, even on the previous game, which had been even more tedious, the Bulgaria away. But that at least started well. I mean, this was a rough international break for France, despite the fact they won both games and qualified for the World Cup, which seems like a strange thing to say, but those games were hard to watch. That Saturday night game against Bulgaria was hard work to sit through that game. And you wouldn't think that with the quality of players they have on show, but very few did shine. Lacazette had his big chance, finally getting a chance to start. Mbappe on one side, Griezmann on the other. Perfect setting, you'd think. He was hauled off, replaced by Giroud. Then Giroud gets a chance to start. He doesn't do much else. It was just not a great couple of days for the French. And this World Cup now, they're among the favourites, and with the squad they have, they should well be. And the way they've cruised to qualification, but as Adam says, there's a lot of work there still to be done.
And that's a real worry for a side that's got a lot of talent. There's obviously a long time until the World Cup yet, and there's plenty of chopping and changing that will probably take place. And Adam, I know you focused on your piece this week, particularly on who will lead the line. Do you think that's a battle that will be solved over these upcoming friendlies, or certainly one of the goals that Deschamps sort of needs to put away before the World Cup starts?
Yeah, I think it has to be. I think if they're going to win the World Cup, which is what they really should be aiming for, if you look at the players they've got, for me, on paper, they're favourites. They have the best international squad, and possibly even the best first 11. At least in terms of balance, perhaps the Argentines are a bit better in attack, even though they have barely scored any goals in their qualifying campaign. Only got sort of 19. But in terms of the entire squad, they're the best on paper. And I think to get the best out of that team, Deschamps needs to quickly work out what that front 3 or 4 or 2 or however he wants to set up is, and how the best combination of players. I think it's really interesting to see how he'll go about doing that, because I don't know that there's a perfect jigsaw between the players on show. I mean, I think Giroud's proven himself to be, very useful for France. And although he's not the most stylish of players and not the most, aesthetically pleasing, perhaps, he is relatively effective for France. And he allows other people to play well around him. But if he plays, does he play with a partner? Does he play with Mbappe through the middle and they go 4-4-2 and perhaps maximise on that Monaco formation of last season, and maybe Lamar and Dembele get in? Or if they go over 3 and do they play with Mbappe and Griezmann outside, which seems the most logical thing. But I don't know that Griezmann's ever played well for France on the wing. And he's so good for Atletico up front through the middle, and has proven for France that he's much better through the middle for Les Bleus too. But it makes that sort of those pieces fitting them together, it makes it very tricky, because if you end up going with a 2 and you end up going with Giroud and Griezmann, that moves Mbappe out to the wing in a 4-4-2, which means he's further from the goal. He's got more defensive responsibilities, and that doesn't suit him. So, and you want to get the best out of him too. So maybe you drop Giroud, maybe you go with the 2 of them up front, and you go Dembele and Lamar on the wings, perhaps Pogba and Kante in midfield. It's so difficult to work out what that jigsaw puzzle is and fitting them all together. And he doesn't really have time to try too many things. So you can't really do trial. You can't have a go at trial and error. He's got to hit the nail on the head pretty quickly. And it'd be interesting to see what he goes for, what he prioritises. I have a feeling that he'll prioritise Giroud and Griezmann might play off him, and then Mbappe and Dembele other side. But yeah, I think there's a lot of options, but it's finding the right one and finding it soon.
And that's the important thing, really. What other big decisions does Deschamps have before Russia slowly crawls around, as it will, Sam?
Well, he seems to have his defensive line more or less set up now. I mean, assuming Mendy comes back eventually, but the centre-half combination, Varane and Umtiti, that seems more or less solid. But he is a big fan of Koscielny. So if Koscielny is ever fit again, there may be a question there. Fitness concerns are the only thing that seem to really worry him in midfield as well, because Kante, Pogba more or less picked themselves. So there's not a lot of decisions to be made there. It really is only in attack. I mean, again, in goal, no one's taking Lloris's side. As many saves as Mandanda might make, Lloris is keeping his place. So it's really only in attack that Deschamps has real difficult decisions to make, but they are difficult decisions to make. And perhaps he's going to have to take the very brave call of leaving some of these huge superstars on the bench. Someone like Griezmann may find himself starting the World Cup on the bench because it suits the team. And then we just see the way the tournament unfolds, which, I mean, it seems crazy. A year ago, this was Griezmann's team. He led them all the way to the European Championship final, but it's not quite worked out for him in the last few months, and France need to find their spark.
And that's the thing missing. It always seems like the French at the moment are on the precipice of something really, really good. There's some great international teams. Brazil are humming at the moment. Germany have got such strength in depth, but France have such quality, especially in those final attacking areas, and depth, that if they just find that right little bit of formula, you just have that feeling that, I don't really want to say it, but because English fans say it every tournament, it seems, but could be their year. Let's move on to Ligue 1 matters as well, as that comes back around tomorrow evening with a great game, although he might be tarred by the fact that some of them might be a little bit tired from these great international exploits, and that's Lyon Monaco. Adam, Lyon haven't won any of their last 5 games, which does include 4 draws as well. But what's holding them back at the moment?
It's an interesting question because from the outset, I kind of feel like they're not getting enough from their forward line, which sounds ridiculous because they've drawn the last 3 games 3-3. So it seems like the obvious sort of down point, if you like, is defensively. But my main issue is with in attack, at least, is with Mariano Diaz and Memphis Depay. Both of those players, they were invested heavily in over the summer and last winter. In the summer, sorry. And when did Depay sign? Was it last summer? Was it last winter?
Oh, it was last winter.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, cool. But even in that time, they've both really kind of struggled to impress. And I remember you and I were speaking on the pod last season, Nathan, that if Depay would either go really, really well or go really, really badly. And it kind of feels like it's edging towards the latter of those two at the moment. Although he's been involved in a fair amount of goals, to watch him play, he's so on the fringes of playing. He's so sort of lackluster. It's really odd to see such a talented player have such little impact. And I think that the control of games is where they're struggling, and that comes from that front three. From last season when they had Tolisso, Lacazette, even Gonalon in the midfield as well. Some of the players they did lose, they controlled Ligue 1 games, and they're not doing that this season. And I think that comes from forward areas, and they lose the ball a bit too easily, and they don't have that control, which is why they're conceding goals, because they're a little bit more open than they were last year. They're a little bit far less experienced, and they let games slip. They should have beaten Angers. They were unlucky to have the sending off with Marcelo, which was ridiculous to say the least. And they were 3-1 up, and they would have won that game probably without that sending off. And they looked very dangerous going forward. But again, it was that sort of what Angers got on top of them. They got in amongst them, and they lost the control of the game, Lyon, despite the obvious caveat having 10 men. And that seems to be sort of a relatively common theme for them this season. So I think that they it's not something that's going to change overnight. They need more from Depay. They need more from as exciting a player as he is, but they still need a little bit more from Diaz. Obviously, still inexperienced players. Depay's only 23, which is ridiculous. If you feel like he's a little bit older than that, but I think they need a little bit more control from forward players, and for players like Ndombele and Toussaint, it's not going to happen overnight again. But they're both 20 years old and both very good players, but they're not obviously the most experienced. And they're lacking like a cool, calm head in midfield who can, or even like sort of attacking midfield to say, let's keep the ball, let's kill this game off, let's calm down. And they're a little bit too all over the place at the moment, which opens avenues up into games for lesser teams. They're still very, very good, got very, very good players, but they need to sort of figure out how they can kill games off a bit better, I think.
Absolutely. And I think I mentioned on Monday's podcast that the pressure's really starting to grow on Genesio, and in all honesty, he's never really quite impressed, and that Lyon side needs to have a little bit more to it, I think. Sam, admittedly, Monaco are also in a bit of a rough patch at the moment, and they'll be without Radamel Falcao, who will be recovering from his exploits in South America over the week. How much would a poor result here impact their title credentials this season?
Well, the thing about Ligue 1 this season is PSG are just not going to drop that many points. They're 3 points ahead already of Monaco. So Monaco simply can't afford to drop points. They have to win. They have to win this game because they have to apply the pressure, or at the very least, just keep pace with PSG. So to lose this game, as big and as difficult a game as it is, it's not easy to go and beat this Lyon side who, as we've discussed, aren't firing on all cylinders, but are obviously a very talented side. If they lose this game, or even really if they draw it, you expect PSG to take advantage of that, stretch that lead to 5 points, and really cut away at any hopes Monaco do have of retaining their title. We're going to have to say this most weeks because PSG just aren't going to drop points, but the pressure is very much on the chasers, and the chasers at the moment are only Monaco.
And that's the real worry, really, to be honest. Let's get some predictions in this one, and then start with you, Adam.
It's going to be a good game, I think. 2-2.
Sam?
I'm gonna back Rachid Ghezal to get the winner against his old side, assuming he's fit, which he may not be, but hopefully he is. So I'll say 2-1 Monaco.
I like that one. I'm going to go for 2-0 Monaco. One from Gazal for the headlines, and maybe a final. If I can get my words out, finally a goal for Baldakaita. Maybe get him off the mark a little bit. Let's move on to the next game, really, and that's on Saturday between Bordeaux and Nantes. Adam, Bordeaux's unbeaten run came to a screeching halt, really, before the international break. But is this a great opportunity for them to get back into the saddle against Nantes?
Possibly. I think Nantes have started the season very poorly, losing at Lille. They looked very much off the pace, and then another defeat at home to Marseille, which they improved in, but still looked like the lesser of those two sides. But since then, as we've discussed before, Ranieri's really taken them to not necessarily another level, but he's made them so much more effective. And they've really started to settle into the way he wants them to play, which is different to the way Conceição played. And obviously it's going to take them at least a little bit. They've actually adapted quite quickly, but at least a little bit amount of time for them to get their heads around that, because it's pretty much, although they signed a lot of players towards the end of the transfer window, the first 11 is still relatively similar. So, it was going to take a little bit of time. So they're not going to be the easiest of opponents for Bordeaux to face. And although Bordeaux will be looking to bounce back from that PSG defeat, I think a win would be great if they were to get it. But Nantes are they've become so good defensively, and they've become very, very clinical as well, which is sort of the best of both worlds. If you talk about Conceição and Michel Zakarian, who was very, very good defensively, and Conceição, who managed to get goals out of his forwards, like Emiliano Sala, who's been very up and down for the last few seasons, formerly of Bordeaux, of course. So I think that Nantes might be a pretty tricky opponent for Bordeaux, and the type of team they won't want to play, because after being torn apart by PSG, that game, if PSG had get their foot down, could have been 12-13-0. 13, well, they got a goal and it won, but it could have been ridiculous. 5-1 up at half time, of course. So I think that Bordeaux would have hoped for a not as much of a sort of physical and aggressive and fierce opponent that Nantes have become, and they're a difficult team to play. And I don't know that Bordeaux will be able to break them down as easily as perhaps there with some other teams. So because that defeat, as you mentioned, to PSG was pretty demoralising. Even though they were third in the table at that point, they went to a team only 2 places above them and got absolutely torn apart. So I think they would hope for a better comeback game, if you like, after that defeat. And I think that Nantes aren't the team they would have wanted to play. I think they probably would have picked pretty much every other team in the league, apart from maybe 2 or 3. So I think it's going to be a tight game, and I think that Nantes will prove very, very difficult to beat. And given form, you could argue that Nantes may be even favourites for this game, even though it is at Bordeaux. But they're a very, very good team at the moment and very effective. So not the easiest for Bordeaux, and it'd be really interesting to see how they do react from that defeat to PSG.
Man, and Sam, Nantes are on a great run, really. They're in 5 wins in their last 6. They were unbeaten in September with a 100% record, in fact. Can they maintain that now? It looks like the more difficult fixtures are starting to creep in. They've got Bordeaux this week. They've got a couple of easy ones, in fairness, for the next 3 weeks, and then Paris, Rennes, Monaco come in November. Is this real sign of their credentials, this one?
I think this game really suits them a lot. As Adam sort of mentioned, Bordeaux really don't do so well with the counterattack. They were torn apart on the break so many times by PSG. But the same thing happened against Toulouse, who are a far weaker side, who hit them again and again on the break, but just couldn't score. And Nantes have built their identity in this run of fixtures. They beat Metz, Strasbourg, Caen, Montpellier, and they did it with very little of the ball. They have less possession than anyone in the league. They don't complete a lot of passes, the worst completion rate of anyone in the league, but they don't care, because they know what they're trying to do. They have an identity, and that's something a lot of teams in Ligue 1 don't yet have. A lot of teams are still finding their feet, figuring themselves out. Ranieri's not know what they're doing, and they'll see this Bordeaux side coming, and they'll be happy to. They'll fancy their chances. And as you say, if they can win this game, they then have a lot of other very winnable games. Guingamp, Dijon, Toulouse at home. They could be firmly ensconced in the top 3 come the real tests a bit further down the road. Not to say they're guaranteed to win this game or even maybe favourites, but I think they'll really fancy themselves. L'Equipe have them all the way up in number 2 in their power rankings this week, which I think is probably a little bit generous, but I think they have some real advantages, and I really like their chances of winning this game.
Yeah, and you just feel as well, if they get through that spell with a couple of wins under the belt before they face those big teams, they can afford to drop the points. And you get into January, and a striker, or maybe a player here and there as well, they could be a really, really interesting side down the stretch as well. Let's get some predictions. Then I'll start with you, Sam.
I'm going to back Nantes to win this 2-0.
I have a feeling this is going to be a draw. I'm going to go 1-1. Adam?
I think it might be a draw as well. I'm going to say, it's on Sunday afternoon, isn't it? Maybe 2-1 Nantes then.
Let's go on to two sides that are possibly in false positions, maybe in Caen and Angers, but I'm sure those fans in Caen won't care one jot. They're in 5th with 15 points. Adam, could they have even dreamed of a better start for the season?
I don't think so. No, not given how last season ended, where they, went into the final day pretty much needing some sort of result at PSG to avoid at least slipping into the relegation playoff, and they obviously got that result. I think perhaps this is slightly different to the way that Nantes have set about their season, although they've ended up with a very similar amount of points. Looking at the table, you mentioned Caen were 5th, and Nantes are 4th with 16 points and Caen 15, so very, very similar. Very similar positions, and they've got very, very similar records. Nantes have scored 6 and conceded 5 in 8 games, and Caen have scored 7 and conceded 4. So they've actually got the best defensive record in the league, Caen, at the moment, which is very much the basis for their success so far this year. And I think that it's also very similar to Nantes in the fact that they haven't really come up against anybody too taxing. I mean, they've got some very, very good wins, which are based on that really good defensive record. And again, being able to counterattack and nick a 1-0 win. Ronnie Roderland's obviously very, very good on the break. Ivan Santini's great from set pieces. I've always quite liked Vincent Bessat as well. I think he's a useful player. Yusuf Ben Assa, who was at Nancy last season, who I quite liked as a Morocco international. He's come in and done very well for them as well. And you've obviously got they've got the experience that perhaps other teams don't have, like Damien De Silva, Julian Ferro have been around the league for a long, long time. Vercout as well in goal. They've got some very experienced heads, and although they may not be the most attractive team to watch, they're an effective team, especially against similar sort of quality of opposition. I think that this may be similar to I think it was not last season, the season before, but they were in the top 2 or 3 at one point, for like Angers were when they were promoted for much of the first half of the season. I have a feeling it's sort of following a similar course to that, and they dropped off and finished sort of 8th or 9th in the end, I think. But it shows that they're a capable team, and that if they're well drilled and they're organised and they know what they're doing, especially in this league, you can get results. And against teams around them, they're proving very, very effective. So I think that it won't last forever. And this is where I'm going to the point that they're different to Nantes. I think Nantes are a much more higher quality team. But I think that Caen are going to have a good season, and a top half finish for them, given the last campaign, would be a great result for Patrice Garand and his charges. So long may it last for them. I hope they're competitive for many weeks to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, Angers is another team that we've had plenty of praise really for their performances this season and getting some really, really great draws, especially the one against Lyon recently. But they've not had much really to show for it, unfortunately, with those draws. How important is it they start winning these kind of games against sides they expect to be around them or below them?
I mean, the most important thing is that they just start winning any kind of games. They've won one the 12th of August. It's the last time they won a game. That's just really not good enough for a team that has played well enough to win games. As you say, we've seen them play some really excellent football, but we've also seen them produce some ludicrously poor defending, brain snap decisions, the wrong pass at the wrong time to give the ball away, and just do silly, silly things over and over again. And if this team, with the quality they have, aspires to be in the top half where they belong, they really do need to start winning games. This against Caen, who are in good form, it's a tricky game, but it's not one that's beyond them, certainly. This has been described in the press as they call it a match charnière, which is it's kind of a watershed moment, potentially. So for both clubs, Caen win this and they really start to believe that European football could be an option for them. Angers lose this, and they're looking over their shoulders. They're looking backwards. For the first time since coming back to Ligue 1, this would be a season of just trying to keep their place rather than pushing with the quality they do have. And that's very disappointing because we've enjoyed what they've put forward most of this season, but they just haven't been able to do it consistently enough through 90 minutes to win the game. So it's really important that they hit the ground now after the international break. They've had time on the training pitch with Stéphane Moulin. Hopefully they're a little bit more organised. They were able to pick out people in the same coloured shirts as them when they're playing out from the back. And now they can actually start showing that quality, win some games, and this is probably a good opportunity to start doing that.
Yeah, exactly. It's horrible seeing one of those sides that you just feel like one win might change their complexion a little bit, especially when they're playing so well. But it's a frustrating one at the moment, which is why I'm going for an Angers special of 1-1 in this one. Go for yours, Adam.
I'm going to go for maybe an Angers 1-0 win. Playing to the level of their opponents is classic Angers. And they do well against good teams and poorly against other teams, the lesser teams. So I think they might even just sneak this one 1-0.
Sam?
I'm enjoying Caen. I'm enjoying the little run, so I'm gonna back them to win this one 1-0.
And it undoubtedly probably will be an Ivan Santini goal at that as well if that one comes in. Our final game this week is a Sunday afternoon game, and that's between Montpellier. Adam, nobody envies Montpellier's schedule at the moment as they face the third side in a row that finished in the top 3 last season, which is hard to believe, really. They've got 2 valuable draws, as we mentioned in the past, in those 2 games. Will that be their aim again in this one?
I think it has to be. I think we sort of talked about teams on the podcast so far today that sort of are effective in Ligue 1 and that perhaps have a certain type of game that suits them and they play to their strengths. And I think Montpellier are another one of those sort of mid-table, perhaps even lower mid-table sides that are capable of playing to their strengths and capable of getting results against a number of the teams in Ligue 1 and good results too. I think their main issue though is that they can't score goals. They're so blunt in attack that they actually are a decent side. They're decent possession. They are capable of putting pressure on other sides and perhaps even creating one or two chances that if they had a proper centre forward they would take, and that they would win them far more games than they are winning at the moment. There's actually one of the other analysts at Football Radio is a very big Montpellier fan, and he was saying about these 2 games earlier today that how good they were in both of these games and playing against 2 of the top 3, that they deserve the points they got. And I think especially against PSG they really did defend very, very well. And both games are games where they don't need to score goals. They're not necessarily expected to go out and attack and score quite a few goals. They're not expected to do that. So it kind of plays to their strengths a little bit. And this is another game against another side from the top 3 of last year where they're not going to be, the onus won't be on them to attack, which suits them. And I think at home as well, Nice are a bit erratic this season. That it's another game where they really fancy themselves and they won't see themselves, put themselves under pressure to go out and take the game by the scruff of the neck. And they'll be happy for Nice to come onto them, and they'll be happily taking a 0-0 again, or as it was against Monaco, a 1-1. And that's fine. That suits them. I think the problem is that without the lack of goals and lack of attacking options, when it comes to the teams around them and even lower, then they're struggling to get results consistently that they might get otherwise. So yes, this is another game that they'll be looking for another result, and they'll be confident going into it as well. So it's a game that suits them, and I think that Nice will have a very tough game on their hands on Sunday afternoon. It could be another draw for Montpellier.
Yeah, some Nice almost feel like a little bit like Mario Balotelli at the moment. They recovered from that slow start by going unbeaten in September, but then the month changed on that Sunday. They played Marseille and they were pretty humbled in that one. How important is it to their European aspirations that they grab a win in this one?
It's hugely important. Of course it is. I mean, they're 10th at the minute, right? Smack bang mid-table. Montpellier are only just behind them. They lose this game, they're in the bottom half again, like they were when the season started so poorly. They did so well to recover. The return of Seri, the return of the verve and the fun that we all enjoyed last season. They were scoring goals again, winning games again, and then it all just came off the rails against Marseille. But that game, I think it was probably a one-off. I mean, you could play that game 100 times out again, and it would never go exactly the way it did. I mean, 2-0 up and flying, 4-2 down, the opposition gets a red card, you get a penalty, you miss. Just absolute bedlam. So I think that while that may have an impact on their sort of psyche and their confidence, we shouldn't panic for Nice. I think they are still, for want of a better word, back. But this is, as Adam's mentioned, it's a very difficult game to win because you're playing against a team who know how to stop you playing. They, like Nantes, they know their style. They know what they're trying to do. And so it's a lot more difficult for Nice to go and sort of unpick a team who will be happy to shepherd them into not dangerous areas and let them have a lot of sort of useless ball and really just sort of stop them from being a threat, because Nice will need to get going early, because otherwise the concerns might start to flood in. And if Montpellier can slow them down, control the game, Nice will begin to maybe remember how badly that Marseille game went from a strong position. And if they do lose this game, the fixtures ahead of them are pretty tough. They got Lazio home and away in the Europa League. They got PSG away. These are difficult games. I mean, Strasbourg at home in there as well. But this is a game they probably really need to win, or at least play well in, to give them the confidence they need to get through this next month, which is going to be really tough.
Yeah, they really need to jump back on the horse, at least anyway, and very soon. I'll get the final predictions then, starting with you, Sam.
I'm going to back them to do it. 2-0.
Adam?
I think this might be 0-0, actually. I think Montpellier another shutout.
I'm going to go for a very late Nice winner and a 1-0 win. Hopefully they can do that and then make the European race nice and interesting, as it's slowly turning into a bit of a weird one this season, at least anyway. That's all for this week. My thanks to Adam, Sam, and everyone listening at home. Join us for the main show on Monday, but for now, enjoy your weekend of football.